Hi, and welcome to the episode. I'm so excited to have my good friend Jean Marie Place with us. Thanks, Jean.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's fun to be here.
It is great to have you. I explained to Jean, this podcast is all about sharing women's stories and mom's stories. And um, Jean, you are like such an amazing person with such a plethora of knowledge. I had to have you on here. So why don't you go ahead and just introduce yourself and your background?
Sure. Well, it is fun to be here. I was excited about it. I was telling Obed, my husband, I said, I get to be interviewed on this podcast. And so,
That's awesome. Is this your
yeah,
first interview? Your
my
first
first
podcast?
interview. Yes.
Friend, I got to be your first podcaster. I feel privileged.
Yes, I'm excited to be here. And I'm in Indiana and I am a professor. So I'm an associate professor of, I call it women's health. The broader field is public health and health science and health promotion, but I specialize in women's health issues. And I'm a
Awesome.
mom of two little girls, a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old.
Awesome. Love that. Well, and we started our journey together at Rick's College. We were roommates, and I was fortunate enough to be placed in your apartment because I learned so much from you and laughed so hard.
Those are some fun days. Was it like 20 years ago? Almost 20 years
I
ago.
can't believe it.
Yeah,
I
I
can't
can't
believe it.
believe it. I
Well,
can't
and
believe
I remember you had the best scrapbook. You had these thick scrapbooks that were so fun to look through about growing up in your teenage years, and you kept meticulous
I,
scrapbooks.
I know.
Do you
I do.
still do
I
that?
still do. Now it's like all digitalized.
Yes,
But I
friend.
still keep like my handwritten journals, and my dad, who is storing all of those scrapbooks back in the garage in Centerville, said to me the other day, like, what do you want me to do with all of these scrapbooks and all of these journals? And I said, well, you can't throw them away.
No.
They're, and he said something that made me laugh. He said, Jean, you have the most well-documented life of anyone.
That is so awesome.
You probably have a pretty
Put
well
that on your resume. Put that on your most well-documented life.
because all of my scrapbooks and all my journals. I was like, who is ever going to read this? I don't think anyone's going to read this.
I will read them because I loved reading them in college. So the other thing I remember about you is you were and are a gifted storyteller. Were you on the debate team or?
Yeah.
Okay. And I remember you'd practice some of your speeches with us roommates, and we would just encore, and we would beg you to do them over and again. You change voices. You were so enthusiastic.
But can you believe like I was the lucky one. I had such wonderful supportive people. It's like a very odd talent, right? It's sort of pretty nerdy. It's very fun. I had such wonderful roommates. You would circle around me and make me feel so good.
Oh, well, we were the blessed ones. I feel like you just you have so many skills. It's hard for me to summarize who you are. I mean, you've done public health, you've done research, you've taught, you've done, social work and debate and anthropology, and there's just so much. And I remember, and I think you were always a writer. Do you feel like you've always been a writer to some degree?
Yeah, I love writing. I do. I love writing. I like the writing that I do now. I feel like is so dry. It's like writing research articles, or like we were talking about, like grant proposals.
Grants,
I
yeah.
feel like it's really dry. But I'm writing a book right now, and
Oh my gosh!
yeah, it's fun. It's a fun project where textbooks, are so boring if you're
Right.
honest, and no one reads them.
Right.
And so, and I've been thinking that we need to write a textbook for public health that is far more colorful, that tells stories of public health professionals who tell the ups and the downs of their programs, what work, what,
Love.
where they cut corners, where they don't, the failures of their programs and the ones that are successful, like to really hear about it, because I teach these public health classes, and if they're not reading the textbook and they're too young to have really much experience doing any sort of public health,
Sure.
they could graduate without really a good grasp of what it's like in our field. And I felt like
Yes.
if we can provide a textbook to tell those stories, that's more engaging. So hopefully they'll read the textbook because it's written more journalistically or with more creativity, like
Love this.
writing the textbook in a first person. We're
First
writing
person.
first person, and we just, so the whole objective, I have myself and two co-authors, so we go to public health programs, so we go to support groups, we go to
Cool.
awareness campaigns, we go to uh, coalition building meetings, kind of all the different components of public health. And then we come back and we do interviews with those people who are on the ground doing this kind of work. And then we write it up in this descriptive fashion. And so we write up the fun narratives about these events. And then we insert into the text vocabulary words and the
Brilliant.
information that students need to know, but it's all contextualized in this wider, hopefully more fun story.
Oh,
So
I'm
I believe, so
loving
yes,
this.
I love writing, and it's been fun to do something
I
fun like
love this. You another thing you're skilled at, girl. You're just
that.
like a plethora of goodness and wisdom.
Oh, you are too, Alicia.
You're
You are
so
too.
nice. Well, and
You
I
just,
love to that, we were talking earlier, like if you could hone down like what's your main specialty, because you have so many. We were talking about your studies in infertility, so maybe
yeah.
talk a little bit about like what led you to that, and what why do you feel like that's an area you love to research?
Oh, right. So, okay. So I care about infertility because I don't think that we talk about it very much. And I think if you talk to, like, if you say the words women's health to a lot of women, I wonder what people would say. My guess is that people would say things like breast cancer, or they would maybe say things like prenatal care or pregnancy or giving birth or menopause. Like they're going to talk
Mm-hmm.
about those sort of things. But I feel like infertility isn't conceptualized as a part of women's health, even though
It should be.
11% of, yeah, exactly, 11% of like coupled women are going to experience it in their lifetime.
Wow.
That's more than 1 in 10. And so I wanted to like talk about it more. And one study that I've done in this field that I care a lot about is assessing if researchers are even researching infertility. So what we did is we took the top 4 journals in women's health, the top 4 scientific journals, and we looked through their archives of all of the articles that they have published in the past 15 years.
Oh,
And
wow.
we classified them. What are the topics of these different articles? And as we imagined, they're talking about breast cancer, or they're talking about birth control, or they're talking about delivery and prenatal care, but only less than 1% of the articles in the past 15 years of scientific women's health journals talked about
Oh
infertility.
my gosh, that's
I think
ridiculously low.
yeah, it's when you compare it that, 11% of women are going to experience infertility in their lifetime, and less than 1% of scientific journal articles in women's health journals are addressing that. It's really a big discrepancy. And of course, the argument is that the infertility articles are going to be published probably in reproductive health journals, like more specialized
Mm,
assistive reproductive technology journals. But my argument when we went to publish is, well, sure, those people already know about infertility, right? They're specializing in it for their careers. But for the broad audience of practitioners who are practicing women's health, to not include infertility as a dominant theme in these women's health journals that are for a generalist audience is a real gap.
that's a disservice for sure.
Right. Right. So anyway, yeah, I love
Love
studying.
that. So tell me about your own journey a little bit with infertility, because I know that's something that you've dealt with, and um, we've talked about that I'm really grateful you're willing to share this, because I'm hoping other women listening who are struggling with infertility can feel supported and maybe find some resources.
Thanks, Alicia. Well, I'm happy to talk about it. So I got married when I was 31, and we immediately wanted, well, I probably immediately wanted to have children, and Obed was kind of like, well, I guess. Anyway, we immediately started trying, and never in 8 years of marriage, 7 or 8 years of marriage, have ever had a positive pregnancy test. Never like had those two little lines on a
Oh,
pregnancy test. And we tried all sorts of things. Like we tried doing assistive reproductive technology, so kind of like IVF. I should say that we never actually went through with the procedure, but we talked with several specialists about doing it. And then we tried to take medicine, a whole host of different medicines to try to resolve it. And I mean, a lot of the
oh
procedures,
man.
I'm sure Obed wouldn't want to talk about it because it's
Mm,
uncomfortable to talk about. You're having to talk about your sex life, and you're having to talk about sperm count, and you're having to talk about reproductive organs, and kind of, are you a woman if you're not able to do a womanly thing, things like
mm,
that, like hard topics to address. But we never did went through with these different procedures, and I'm glad that we did it. I feel like my journey might differ from some because I've never experienced like the intense disappointment of having done one of those procedures and it not having worked out, because not only is there intense disappointment because you so badly want a child, and you're putting all of your sort of hypothetical eggs in this basket that it's going to
sure.
work out,
Mm,
but it's not without a cost, like a
right.
heavy financial cost. I mean, for the procedure itself, you're probably looking at $10,000 to $12,000, and then
Oh my
you're having to
gosh.
pay for your own stimulation drugs, the drugs that are going to stimulate your cycle and produce these eggs that can be inseminated and transferred, and so that's maybe another $5,000. So you're at minimum probably looking at $15,000 to $20,000 a cycle.
Oh my gosh.
Now, of course, I'm talking with prices from a few years ago, so I'm not current on them. The prices may have changed, and some
Right.
physicians offer some packages where you're able to pay $20,000 and then you get three chances at it.
Mm,
Nevertheless, you are having to spend a lot of money, and I'm glad that Obed and I never had to spend that kind of money to do it. But one statistic that I share when we talk about infertility with our students is that if you try one cycle of IVF with fresh gametes, so fresh sperm and fresh eggs,
yeah.
and depending on your age, you have roughly maybe a 25% chance of bringing home a live baby. And as you age, if you are 40 or over, it's like a less than 1% chance of bringing home a
Oh my
live
gosh.
baby.
Jean, that is heartbreaking. Absolutely heartbreaking.
Not great statistics, right? Like not great odds. But if you do three cycles, and the WHO recommends that couples who are going to try this route try at least three times,
Oh,
because then
okay.
is increased to 50%. But even so, then you times that cost by three times, and you can, and you still only have a 50% chance, even with that third cycle. So it can be really tough. It can be tough. But of course, the joy, if you do get lucky and are able to bring home a live birth, is certainly well worth it. But
Sure.
I'm
It's
speaking from
getting
the
there.
perspective of never having gone through it and
Hmm.
being totally worried about those costs.
Hmm.
So then we went through the route of what did we try? I mean, we tried so many things. Then we tried adopting privately through private adoption agencies, and there's a high cost with that, depending on where in the country you are and what agency you go through. We're writing a paper about that, and the average cost of a domestic infant adoption, so adopting a child that's an infant from the United States, on average is $39,000.
My
Yeah, and
gosh.
that's just average. So of course there's prices that are lower, but and those prices and costs in many cases are going to lawyers and they're going to social workers and all very needed professions. So I don't doubt um, that those costs go to important services,
Sure,
but
sure.
the cost for the adoptive couple can be pretty outrageous. And thinking that these infertility services and adoption services are never covered by insurance. Um,
Never.
well, there's like 4 states, maybe between 4 and 8 states, I think the last time I checked, which was a couple of years ago, that cover IVF. Illinois is a state that covers, that mandates by state law that the insurance companies cover IVF. But they might not cover all of it. They might cover only one cycle and not up to the 3 cycles recommended. So in the majority of states, we could say, to be safe, IVF isn't covered. And so
Wow.
there's those costs, and then adoption are those costs. And so for us, we ran into it saying this is just going to outprice us. We're just
Right.
not able to. And then I could go on, but in addition, I think there's a misconception that there's a lot of available children, that there are just kind of
Mm,
these waiting children waiting for adoptive families. And I think that's true in foster care. I think that's true. But according to the CDC, there is one child for every 6 waiting families.
really?
There's, on average, 6 waiting families for every adoptive child that
Wow.
becomes available in the private system.
Oh my
So,
gosh. You're right. There is a huge misconception.
and you could be waiting a long time. Like we tried the private system and we're waiting like at least 2 years without a
For
single.
real? 2 years without a call?
Yeah. And so then, by a series of sort of small miracles, we got involved in the foster care system and very quickly were placed with our 2 children, relatively quickly placed with our 2 children. And, they weren't newborns, but they were ours, and they
Yeah.
were precious, and we accepted them and embraced them. So it's tricky. So the whole world of infertility, I think, is fascinating. It's such an emotionally charged field, because for the couples, either men and women or same-sex couples who desire children, it feels like the wait is forever.
I bet. So, would you say what was your experience with foster to adoption? Would you say it was overall positive? Was it up and down? Like, what would you say about that?
Oh, if anyone was ever considering it, I would just want to talk to them and cheer them on. And it was one of the most eye-opening experiences. It was sobering in a way that I had never experienced, because through the foster to adopt program, which is through generally state Department of Child
Okay.
Services, they're working with families to try to reunite a child that has been removed with the biological parents. And that's by mandate. They have to, for a certain number of months. In Indiana, it was for at least 16 months. They had
Wow.
to reunite and get the biological family to a place where they could reunite with their child. And if not, then they were looking for kin. They were looking for relatives to adopt that child. And then kind of the third option is to look for these kind of outside external families. And so it was sobering, like you're caring for these children, or this little child, knowing that everyone around you is working to take that child from you and place them back with a biological parent. And that biological parent, you have a lot of like love in your heart for that child, or for that biological parent. I mean, and I guess I should only speak from my experience. Like in my experience, the biological parent was a wonderful woman. The one that we got to know, the other biological parent of my other daughter, wasn't available to get to know. But the one that I did get to know, she was in foster care herself. She
No.
had been victimized as a child herself. And, like there were so many failures of the system to care for the biological mom that it was no surprise when the biological mom wasn't equipped to be a mother herself, because she had been failed time and time and time
Yeah.
again. And so there is a lot of, like, I think, compassion that you can learn and that you're exposed to in
Mhm.
getting to know biological parents. And there's so much stigma, like it's so easy to blame the biological parents and say that you're not capable of taking care of your child, or you chose drugs over a biological
Yeah.
child. But it's rarely that simple. In fact,
There's so
it's
much
never
to the
that simple.
story. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much more to the story. So for us, it was just humbling, and it was sobering, and it was beautiful, and it was heartbreaking.
I
And
bet.
at our oldest girl's adoption hearing, the biological mom actually showed up. So can you imagine that? The biological
Oh,
mom, like, voluntarily showing up, that her biological child was being adopted by another couple. Like, I I wrote about it in my journal, and I called it jaw-dropping love. Like, that's just jaw-dropping love to me.
oh
So,
my gosh. What was that like to have her there?
oh, it was beautiful. It was like so beautiful to be able to one day share with my daughter the idea that all of these supportive adults were supporting you. Everyone, all of these supportive adults said, this is the best place for you.
For
And
you.
the biological mom, beautifully said, this is where she chose to have you raised. Like, I think it just shows incredible, immense love.
Wow, what an experience. So
Yeah.
did she choose you as adoptive parents, or were you kind
Well,
of chosen for her in a sense?
yes, it would be that one, that we
Okay.
were, the
Okay.
state, through their criteria, had chosen us and called us and asked us if we wanted to foster
Yeah.
our foster daughter at that time. And then, so we kind of just got chosen by the state. And then we were later introduced to the biological mom, who didn't have a choice in us, but I mean, she got us, whether she liked
Yes. Do you
it.
still have like a relationship with her, have contact with her?
Yeah, we see each other
Wow.
on Facebook, and maybe once a year we get together in person.
You
And
do.
yeah, we get together in
Wow.
person. And yeah. I mean, like I said, I can't speak to everyone's experience. I'm
Sure.
sure that some people have experiences that are much more difficult, where it's like pulling teeth to get the foster child that you've loved and cared for to stay in your care, because there can be these really ugly custody battles where biological relatives or the biological
Mm.
parents aren't really willing to relinquish. But in our case, it was just like a 2-year process of the biological mother, our dear biological mother, just slowly realizing that she wasn't going to be equipped to do it, and then taking her time to relinquish her rights and taking her time to
Wow.
sign the papers, which was fine. I wouldn't want to rush anyone in
But
that.
2 years, that's a long time for you to be kind of like in limbo, waiting. And I
Yeah,
bet that just pulls at your heartstrings. And what an emotional time, I bet.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's so easy to talk about it now because it all is settled, but at the time, I remember there was an experience where the judge decided that, more rather than just a 2-hour visit per week with between our foster daughter and the biological mom, they wanted to increase it to 3 hours a week. And I remember that was really hard for me, because it was like an hour to get to the visit, 3 hours there, and then an hour home. So it was
Oh
one day
man.
that was just that was sort of spent doing those things. And so there, like, I remember that being really challenging. And
Yeah.
also because our daughter at that time didn't know. So and it was at a stage where our little daughter didn't know why I was kind of like saying, go with her, like, go with her, and
Yes.
crying for me. And then I felt bad
Uh,
because I wasn't the
oh
mom.
my
The mom was right there, and the mom wanted the child. So it was like this really awkward thing.
God. Mm,
But it
wow.
all worked out. And like I said, I'm speaking from it. I would be
Sure.
interested to get our biological mom's perspective on that to see how she viewed the whole situation.
Right.
Very-
What has been your experience with like helping your girls through trauma? Because I'm
Yeah,
sure that they've been through some trauma from all of this.
yeah. So the one that we recently adopted, our youngest, she definitely did because she was removed from her former foster home at 2 years, and then she came to our home. So the former foster home, there were problems of abuse in that home, and so the state found out, and the state quickly stopped the license, stopped placing children in their home. I think they're serving time in prison, and then all of
Oh
those
my
children
gosh,
from the
Jean.
former home moved
That
into new
poor
homes.
little girl.
Yeah, so just in the middle of the night, at 1 or 2 a.m., we went to pick her up at the local DCS office and then brought her home. And it was like, I remember that first night she was sleeping in my bed with me, and we both were just looking at each other, trying to sleep and then looking at each
Oh,
other, like trying to sleep and then just looking at the other person. Because can you imagine all of a sudden like a 2-year-old child
no.
taken from everything that you've known and then placed in this strange car? But she like those first few months, it was like every time she woke up in the morning, it hit her with the realization that she was in this strange home with strange people. My husband is a Spanish speaker speaking a strange language, like.
Yeah.
But then after 6 months goes by, maybe 6 or 7 months, she didn't seem to wake up with a heaviness anymore. She
Oh,
didn't seem to wake up with this longing anymore. And we sometimes we'll show her a picture of her former foster parents or the former home, and it doesn't look like there's any recognition. So we
really?
have to talk to like a child development expert to know if they're capable of recognition, but there doesn't seem to be any spark of recognition.
Wow.
So she just, and my older child loves, they're sisters in every way. They're not biological sisters, but they love each other. And I feel like my older daughter just embraced her,
Oh,
just embraced her. And that helped in ways that I couldn't have done. Like I
sure.
remember one night, I'll share a story with you. I think it was the first, or might have been that first week. I was trying to put her down in her crib, which was right next to my other daughter's crib. And it was cribs where one side had been taken off so they could get down, and so they could get out by themselves. Anyway, my little girl, the new one, didn't want to sleep in there and kept kind of whimpering, crying. And for the first week, my older daughter came into the crib and slept with her, brought her pillow
Gee.
and her blanket and cuddled up. And when my older daughter came in and slept with my new daughter, they just cuddled up together. They just totally cuddled up like two little kittens. Like they cuddled up and the whimpering stopped. But it was like I couldn't have stopped that
No.
whimpering. Like she still would have whimpered with me. But the fact that another 2-year-old child knew to comfort her new sister, I didn't ask my other daughter to go and comfort her. She knew somehow instinctively
Instinctively.
to get out of bed and to curl up and to get right there next to her, and that was the comfort that they needed. Like, incredibly beautiful.
Jean, thank you for sharing that story. That is just, oh, being a mom myself too.
Yeah,
It's like the power of
yeah,
siblings and
right.
love that like you were saying, things you couldn't do yourself to help them.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
and
So
how beautiful that they've come from totally different families and backgrounds and have found a way to become sisters and
yeah,
mesh
yeah,
together.
yeah, definitely. And they know that they're adopted, and they kind of talk about, when am I going to get sealed in the temple,
Oh, they know that they're adopted. Oh,
Yeah,
I
they know that
love
they're
that.
adopted, and they have a photo book with pictures of their biological parents, and so like they'll know, oh, that's my birth mom, and you're my mom, and that's my birth mom. They're not able to kind of distinguish
Yeah,
what that means, but they know that they weren't in my uterus, that they were in
right.
another woman's uterus, and they say you're
Well,
needing.
and I think one of the most beautiful pictures that you've ever shared was the day that you were sealed to your first
Yeah,
daughter. You
yeah,
were all in white,
Yeah.
And I just remember just like tearing up and being like, this is the power of like social media, being a social media person. It's
Yeah.
like when we can share beautiful moments and sharing each other, like feel that love for each other and being so happy for you, but being far away. Like that was
Yeah.
just such a beautiful picture. Like
Yeah.
all three of you were just like glowing, just absolutely glowing.
Oh, thank you,
Oh,
Alicia.
it's
I
just
love that
beautiful.
picture too. That was a really special moment. I remember writing on that post something about it was amazing to me that three people who didn't know each other now never have to live without each other. It was
Ah,
amazing to me,
it
that
just kills me.
like these, three souls in the world, three separate souls, and now four separate souls all of a sudden could come together to form a family and a forever family. Like that was,
Yes.
it still makes me marvel, like the beauty of adoption, that we can take different people and say, you're going to become a family now. I just think it's really,
I love that. That's
but not without
amazing.
heartbreak, right? Like
Right.
another quote that I really like is, it says, and I'll try not to mess it up, but it says, like, a little girl calls me mommy, like another it says another mother's daughter calls me mommy. Like the magnitude of that blessing and the depth of that tragedy is not lost on me. Like that's how I feel when
Oh,
another woman's daughter calls me mom. Like, the magnitude of that blessing is incredible, but the depth of that tragedy, that a birth mom couldn't care for her child, a tragedy, not a stigmatized like blame game, but a
yeah.
tragedy that,
Right.
like, I think it's always important to recognize that. I read something about that
I
every
love
time an
that.
adoption happens, you have to acknowledge that it was built on ashes,
Yeah.
that it was built on someone's tragedy.
Oh my gosh, Jean. That makes me want to just like be better as a parent. Like part
Mhm.
of me wants to go into that mom guilt and be like, oh my gosh, and I yell at my kids and I scream at my kids and I da da da. But
Yeah.
just being able to stop and be like, wow, like when I start like moaning about my issues, like just to put things into perspective, like, it
Sure.
makes you
Yeah.
appreciate and maybe treasure more
Yeah.
your
Sure.
own struggles and your own things you've been
Right.
given.
Right. And it's a good reminder for me too. It's good to hear you reflect on it too, because I'm like, oh, I remember I can yell too. I can be really.
We could all yell, right? But the fact that we keep trying, that's huge. And I think that's
Right.
powerful too when we share our stories, is
Mm-hmm.
being able to say, we're relatable. We're all,
Mm-hmm.
as women, we all have common threads, you
Mhm.
know?
Absolutely.
We
Yeah.
all have, the women's guilt and the multi,
Yeah.
our brains can do multiple things
Yeah.
and we
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
so many roles and so many things to juggle, but like
Yeah.
our stories can bond us together.
Absolutely. Oh, yes, absolutely. I love that idea of like building stories, building empathy through stories,
Ooh,
like,
I love that. I have to write
um,
that down. That is beautiful.
yeah. Well,
Building
just,
empathy through stories.
yeah. And kind of what you were talking about with like the good side of Facebook, being able to share stories, like real, authentic stories through
Mm,
Facebook, and build empathy across social media or across any story that is shared, that you can, because we're all in such different situations or circumstances, but I like how you were talking about that there's common threads, and if you can build on those common threads and use them to build empathy with each other,
love that.
really powerful.
Well, and especially during this time of, COVID-19 and
Right.
the world like shutting down essentially and
Right.
having to relearn
Yeah.
how to function. Um,
Yeah.
I have been so impressed with the stories that have come out of empathy
Mhm.
and
Me
like
too.
the people that have learned to like pivot and help instead of like like
Right.
intrinsically we want to go in because we're
Right.
afraid, but being able to push outward and share with
Absolutely.
love, I think that's been
Absolutely.
one little good that has come out of all of this.
Absolutely. I have loved that too. Every story that I hear of that, I think is really like, I always want to pay special attention of people like setting aside fear, or setting aside selfishness,
Right.
something bigger than themselves. Like that's what you get to see in crises, which is neat.
Well, and I love too, like my mom was saying the other day, she's like, you should keep a journal because unlike Jean, my journal skills are struggling. But she's like, you should keep a journal of this crazy time. And I was like, oh no, the memes will speak for themselves. I feel like the memes that have come out of this and the humor, like that is
Wow.
part of survival too, is being able to laugh together
Yeah,
and cry together. And yeah.
absolutely. Oh, totally. I'm right there with you. Yeah.
Well, and I distinctly remember laughing and crying with you in college. Well, and we have to like I remember when you put the light bulb above your bed hanging from a string.
What was the story behind that? Was it because that like signified good ideas?
Yeah, I think it was like finals week or something, and you were trying to get some kind of inspiration or ideas or energy. And so like we went into your room, we're like, Gene, and it was like this light bulb hanging. And I was like, I love that. Like we had the funniest times. Like there was the Ken doll that
Yes,
sometimes we would find the Ken doll
yeah,
on the counter with a gun to his head, and we
yeah.
knew you were having a rough day. Okay, that was the best. That was
Right.
the best. Didn't you end up giving the Ken doll away to someone in Brazil?
Yes,
Okay.
I did. Yes, you're good. You should like write an addendum to my journal that contains details.
Memories from Alicia. Like
Exactly.
I think you took your Ken doll with you when you went to Brazil
Yes,
as a missionary, right?
yes,
And I
yes.
feel like someone needed him somehow.
Yes, I wish I could remember. Maybe I have it in my journal. So let me like do a prologue to this show, and I'll give you more details about what happened.
I'm vaguely remembering something to do with she was learning how to like live without her boyfriend or something, and like somehow the Ken doll brought her some
Yes,
much needed comfort.
yes, exactly. Okay, I'll go and check that. You got a great
That
memory.
that was a gift of love.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I
I would
love
remember
that.
that. And then there was something with Coriantumr, right? That
Yes, I think that was his name.
is that
I
what we
think you
named
named him Coriantumr. Yeah. Well, and then I think there was a time when we felt like the gun to the head was a little violent. So I think
it?
we put like a gummy in his hand or something. But like the gummy signified like stress. So many good moments. Like there
Yeah.
were so many. I remember a lot of all-nighters.
Yes, I remember that too. And our Hillcrest, is that where we
Yes,
were?
yes.
I
In our
like a
little,
nice apartment. I
but
like
I
a
don't think they were nice. Like looking back, I don't I think they were pretty like shoddy, but at the time we felt like they were nice because they had a fireplace or something. I don't know.
right, exactly.
But
And do they still exist? Or are they
they
get
do. I
demolished? Oh,
think
they
they
still
do.
exist.
Last
Wow.
time I was in Rexburg. And they didn't we I think we took an anthropology class together,
Did we?
but we weren't in the same class, but we had the same teacher. And so I did distinctly remember us trying to work on our projects late at night and like trying to throw things together and
Yes, I remember that too. Oh, yes, I remember. Yeah, totally. I mean, I can see it all in my head. I can see the
right.
hallway bathroom. Wasn't there like a hallway bathroom?
Yes. And do
Yeah.
you remember our tribal screams?
Yes, so how could I
Okay, I think when
how could
things
I
got
forget?
bad, we would all leave the house and huddle in a circle and just like let out a yell.
And Erin Hatch would be, I remember she loved tribal screams. She
Erin,
was very into them.
yes, tribal screams.
Yeah,
Oh man, those were the days, right? When our only worry was like passing a class and trying to date a boy, right?
exactly.
And
And I
now look
would
at
go,
us.
and I still don't think I would go back to that stress though.
No, you're right.
Like it was definitely more minor, but it still is not a type of stress I would
It's true. You're right. You're right. There are some benefits to growing up a bit.
yes, yes. We'll live it through it with our daughters, though.
Exactly. We'll strongly encourage them to room together.
Yes, exactly.
When they get to that age, we'll be like, we have the perfect roommate for you. Well, Jean, thank you so much for being willing to be on the show and just sharing your story and sharing just part of your journey. Really
Oh,
appreciate it.
my pleasure. Alicia, like I've said, you have such a gift. You're an excellent, excellent conversationalist. You've
You're so
just,
nice.
you've put me up a few notches and it's been really fun.
You're
Thank
the
you.
best, Jean. Thanks so much. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.